Hi, this is Carrie Margaret with Create Love, and today I'm going to talk about how to love yourself. And beyond how to love yourself, 3 uncommon ways or very little talked about ways that you can love yourself. And self-love, wow. Whew. There's so much that I could say about that. And well, if you've got one life, you might believe that we have multiple lives, but if you have one life and you develop that skill of really loving and honoring and respecting yourself, which are all kind of 3 separate things, but loving yourself and then building a life around that, I can guarantee you one thing: you are going to have a very rich and fulfilling life. So before we get into talking about self-love and why people care about self-love and these techniques, I just wanted to say I did something today that was a little atypical for me, because this YouTube channel Expression I put out there to put out my own expression in the world and to serve you. And I watched some of my analytics today, and I am so incredibly honored that pretty much in all the videos, those of you that are staying beyond the initial drop-off, there tends to be a little initial drop-off in YouTube in general, the first minute, you're staying for the entire video. And I just felt amazingly honored that there's so many of you that are staying with me all the way through. And that was, very exciting. So I wanted to thank you again for watching, for staying all the way through, and especially for those of you who subscribe. So right now, if you could hit that subscribe, that would be amazing, because that helps to get more of these videos out in the world, which helps more people love themselves and others more powerfully. So let's jump into how to love yourself. 3 common and neglected spaces. Number 1, finding your core connection to yourself. Now, this one is like an incredibly sneaky one and almost a hard one to find, because we are built for belonging, and the way that modern culture has developed, particularly in cultures like the United States, is there's a level of fragmentation. There's a level of people being pulled out of themselves rather than being encouraged to connect to themselves. And this shows up in so many different ways. Like, I could probably speak hours about this one particular one. But some examples of that are like, we're taught to seek validation, and validation, acknowledgement. Okay, acknowledgement is super healthy in relationships and in belonging. It is a need. It is a need to be acknowledged for who we are. And we have created a lot of things in culture that are based on validation. That happens a lot in social media, like how many likes did something get? Is one way that people will get validation. And they actually, we get dopamine hits and everything from this level of validation. There can be validation related to achievement. There can be validation related to looks, or the striving for better looks, or a more fit body beyond our body's natural fitness. Or there's so many different ways that validation shows up. Approval, like we can be pulled out of ourselves for looking for approval for others. And then again, this comes from this natural need to be, seen in our essence and to be approved of. We're social creatures, and indigenous cultures, I'm not going to go deep down the rabbit hole. That'd be a fun video to do, though. Maybe I'll bookmark that for a future video. So in certain indigenous cultures, there was this pattern of the tribe accepting each other, accepting their essence. And actually, oh my gosh, there's an amazing African tribe This just came into my mind and I'll share it. But again, with a future video, I could come in with all the references and all those things. But an African tribe that I had read about, where everybody was born into the tribe, had a song. And when people got lost, the tribe would sing their song to remind them of themselves. Anything that can kind of pull us from the outside and look for any kind of external source rather than internal source of connection to ourselves can pull us away from our core. And a really sneaky way that this shows up is in codependency. Codependency is such a sneaky, slippery thing to talk about because we're all interdependent. Codependency in relationships is kind of more like when we're looking for another to complete us, or for us to complete another, and then we can't feel whole without them, versus coming together so that in some senses, that's coming together and two people feeling like they complete each other. But in interdependence, actually having complementary skills or personality traits or characteristics is amazingly beautiful. We want to be around others where we complement each other. We don't need to be all around people that are just like us, right? So in interdependent relationships, we are going to have these different levels of competence and skill and passion in different areas and come together and complement each other. Codependency happens more when we feel like, we absolutely could not live without the other person, when we feel like all of a sudden interdependence, it's more of an expansive thing. So it's a opening thing in our body. And codependence is more of a fear-based thing. So there's a constriction, we could never live and survive without this relationship, that there's a lot of, or we think that it is so important to us that we will neglect our own needs and cause things allow things like disrespect or things like big violations of our boundaries and all of that, because we're afraid to lose this thing. Now, this can be with people, and it can also be with jobs. It can be with an internet following. It can be with all these different things when we start to silence our own truth and our own level of needs for fear of loss of something. And that's coming from a tighter fear kind of space versus an expansive space, because in more expanding relationships, and again, there are no perfect relationships, even with ourselves, okay? Everything gets to be imperfect and messy, all right? We're not looking for perfection. Anyways, in interdependent relationships, there's a lot of that similar play of like I said, complementary pieces, but the energy is going to be more expansive, okay? So codependent relationships will tend to pull us out of our core. Just like validation or doing something for approval will pull us out of our core. All of these things might get us great external results, but sometimes they're pulling us outside of our core. So we notice this happening. Take a breath, because you're human. And you get to be on this planet, and you get to be messy and human. You don't have to be completely and totally evolved right now. I have a really funny mentor in energy healing who has this joke that he always says on stage, where it's or with, groups of people that he's mentoring in energy healing. And he was like, how do you know if you're crazy? The punchline is, if you're human. Everybody's got their little crazies. Everybody's got their little messiness. So when you notice yourself being pulled out of yourself, okay, you can come back to you. You can come back to you. One way to notice that is when you're feeling that really constricted and heavy energy. You can use things like your breath. You can use things like visualizing sending yourself nourishment and love. There's lots of different techniques that you can use to come back to your core. If you're a woman, I'm doing a course doing shortly a course on returning to your core and your unique signature radiance. So that's one way that you can come back to your core. So I'll just drop that one in there, and I'll put down my Instagram below so you can DM me if you're interested in hearing more about that. But there are so many different ways to come back to your core self and be planted in your connection to self. And for me, that's like super important for me to be connected to a higher power at the same time. So some people like to call that God. Some people like to call it the universe, or all these different things. We'll just call it a higher power. I like to invite God into all spaces of my life, and especially in my connection with myself. I feel like when I am connected to my own core, I am connected to God and a higher power. Number 2 is seeing yourself. It's even beyond, I was going to say seeing yourself, hearing yourself, understanding yourself. And all of that is really having intimacy with yourself. But I'm going to, like in number 2, I'm going to break down we're talking about seeing yourself, hearing yourself, and understanding yourself. And in seeing yourself, a lot of that is seeing your unique and core gifts, seeing your skills that you've already developed, and then the skills that you're interested in developing. That's also part of understanding yourself. And then hearing yourself, it has to do with like sometimes something is just really needs to be heard. And that doesn't mean that it needs to be spoken out into the world. It needs to be heard by you first. So you might kind of have this like nagging sense that like your heart is trying to tell you something, and allowing yourself to just hear that is essential. It's essential. Sometimes people are afraid, oh my gosh, if I hear that voice, that means I need to end this relationship, or I need to leave this career, or I need to uproot my whole life, and I'm not ready to hear that. And I know that there's this gnawing thing in my heart or in my stomach, and it's going to cause me to change everything and lose everything, or lose things that I don't want to lose. Not lose everything, but sometimes we need to let go of the things that aren't us, okay? Hearing ourselves is not about discarding things. It's not about necessarily being like impulsive in our lives or changing everything in one day. Well, we could, decide to change things very quickly. It also can just be like actually hearing this side of ourselves where there is some kind of truth that we need to hear from ourselves. So allowing ourselves to at least hear it and acknowledge it. Then we can get into the more advanced thing of like, okay, if it's a relationship, if it's a romantic relationship and there's something that isn't working for you, once you hear yourself, you can get into the more advanced thing of thinking about, is there a boundary that needs to be placed? Am I losing myself in this relationship? Do I need to connect more to my own core? Am I losing time for my ability to really connect to the gifts I want to put out in the world, or passions? And there's so many different examples that I could pull out. But once you hear yourself, then you can see whether, what you can do related to that. And maybe just hearing yourself, you might just sit with a truth for a period of time. All right. And sit with your own truth. And sometimes you might go on to accept that truth and just move through with where you are without making changes if they don't need to be made, but that space needs to be heard by you. So hearing yourself, we just talked about, super important. Your core gifts. I'm gonna share a few of my gifts. Feels important in this video about self-love. So much of my own journey has been about self-love and over focusing on others. I brought up codependency before, over focusing on others and putting their needs above mine. That tends to be something that, at least in US culture, is frequently taught to women. And no shame, no blame, no make wrong. It's just like we get to empower ourselves to step into a new future and create a new future for ourselves and for others culturally, right? So yeah, for me, it was really important to step into some of these core gifts. I just wrote out a few right before I did this video. Sensitivity. My sensitivity allows me to really see other people, to really connect with other people, to have developed and have a lot of skill in intimacy. Not just, a lot of times when people talk about intimacy, they think they're talking about sex. Now, there is sexual intimacy, and then there is also just intimacy, into-me-see, seeing other people and being seen by other people. And my sensitivity has allowed me to attune to other people and really play with them in all different levels. Like one example, just this past weekend, this is an example of intimacy with a stranger, with like a little boy that has, again, intimacy is connection and nothing to do with sexual intimacy or any of these things. I was at a pool with a little boy who wanted to play with a ball. And so I started like playing ball and playing catch with the boy, and was able to see like how he wanted to be acknowledged and appreciated for like he was a really great brother and really great with the other kids in the pool, and he was super fun to play with, and like we had this great time. I think it was like 4 or 5. We had this great time together, and it was super connected and intimate and fun. That is an example of connection and intimacy. It's like seeing the value and the beauty of the person in front of you and then playing in a space together and creating something really fun. It's just a really magical time in the pool playing. And other core gifts are a sense of fairness, of wanting everybody to have access to, all different sides of themselves, to be able to to love themselves, put their gifts out in the world, have incredible relationships, have wonderful love relationships, like have it all, have everybody really wanting people to have access to all sides of themselves and all sides of life. And you might be like, Carrie, well, the life can be kind of unfair, and so people have certain advantages and disadvantages, and that's a whole nother rabbit hole. I'm just saying that one of my core gifts is fairness, and it's played out in lots of different ways in my life, and a real gift of mine. Another is this kind of like nourishing, uplifting, encouraging energy. Another one of my core gifts. And another one is energy healing, being able to heal energy within myself that results in physical healing and emotional healing and mental healing, and in others. So those are some of my core gifts that I'm so grateful for and get to share with the world and build on. So what about yours? What are some of your core gifts? And if you're like, ick, I can't believe she just like talked about her core gifts, that is part of humility. Part of humility is being able to see the unique preciousness of every person. So you have unique core gifts within you, and I would invite you to investigate those a little bit. Dig into those core gifts in loving yourself, because that creates so much love for yourself, and that allows you to bring that love out into the world, where you get to receive the give and take that doesn't have to do with validation, but is just more of like the give and take when you are giving your core gifts out into the world and the world is receiving you. That is a beautiful way for you to love yourself. Let's see, number 3, honoring your space and boundaries. This one almost didn't get in the list because I'm like, well, people kind of talk about boundaries a bit. But my take on this is less of this thing of like putting up fences and defenses, and more about like the true sense for me of like space and boundaries is like what feels good to you, like, or what looks good to you. Like, how do you want your relationships, your spaces, your life to feel or, look like? Boundaries are about you. They're not about other people. They're about how you move around comfortably in the world. They're about things like how much sleep you need, what kind of nutrition or, meal planning you need. Like, some people do really well when they don't eat until 12 and they eat like a short window and stop eating by, whatever short window. Other people like tend to graze all day long. That's just a silly example. Well, not so silly if that's, if you feel out of balance or cranky or not like yourself because there's something going on with your nourishment. Like, your nourishment has to do with your own boundaries. It's like what you need to feel good. A mentor of mine once said, like, if you are, feel like life is melting down, you're having problems with your relationships, like, check first, like, are you sleepy? Are you hungry? Are you thirsty? Like, take care of like your basic bodily needs. And that has to do with boundaries. So many times we're taught to like push beyond our own boundaries. And actually the highest level performers tend to be really, really good about these types of details. Like, I don't remember what biking team it was in the Tour de France where they like had realized that if they brought their mattresses with them for the team, for the training, then everybody would sleep better and they would have a better advantage for racing the race. So they actually brought mattresses with them. Like, top performers think a lot about things like boundaries and these types of personal needs. So you're not selfish for thinking about yourself, for taking care of yourself. And this really falls into what your boundaries like / needs are. I'll get into needs in a second because needs are funny things. And, in terms of, your communication and your spaces and all of this, like, how do you want everything to feel for you? For you. Boundaries. This is like such an incredibly rich conversation. I thought about maybe doing a group or a course about it at some point because there's so much richness and just like allowing us to fill up our own cup and to be really full, take care of our own boundaries when we go out in the world, whether that's like high performance wise, leadership wise, parenting wise, relationship wise, creating anything in terms of self-expression out in the world, like coming from this very full cup, man or woman. Like, so I want to get into just real second, like a little footnote I wanted to put on needs is that what I love about this, like cultivating your own space and your own boundaries and looking at things like your needs, is that I think it's somewhat unrealistic that any one person is going to be able to fulfill 100% of our needs all the time. And part of this dialogue about romance and partnership and all of these things, I think there is some romancing of like this idea of somebody who can come in and fulfill all of our needs. And I think becoming skillful in partnership, oh my gosh, it's like one of the things that I love the most. And being devotional, these are really beautiful things. At the same time, nobody is going to be able to fill your needs 100% of the time. So when you take care of your space and your boundaries and your needs, that is such a beautiful way for you to take care of yourself. Now, nobody is saying in this that we don't get to be interdependent and have healthy relationships and people that like mutually honor ourselves. And in all of this too, I put this down under number 3, could almost be another category. We want to think about what are like the non-negotiables for us, in terms of our boundaries and our needs and how we relate to other people. So like one non-negotiable for me is I've just really decided that I want to invite God into every space of my life, every relationship. When I say every relationship, I do this a lot on this channel. I don't have these multiple romantic relationships. I'm not inclined towards polyamory. That's a non-negotiable for me, like in terms of romance. I very much enjoy monogamy. When I talk about all of our relationships, I'm talking about all of our relationships, like my relationship with my kids and my relationships with my friends and all these different relationships. And I I've decided to invite God or a higher power into all of those spaces. So for me, that's a non-negotiable. Like God just gets to be in all spaces of my life. And God isn't like some man in the sky. For me, the closest definition that I could give you of God is just a sense of love and goodness and expansiveness. It's almost like the water that I believe that we're all swimming in, that sometimes we block ourselves off from. And I think that is God. It is this it's this sense of love. And I invite that sense of love and sense of God into all spaces of my life, into this podcast, into any work I do, into all of my thoughts. May my thoughts be aligned. I've done lots of thought work, all of my creative projects, everything. That energy that God force gets to come into all those spaces. And it's so funny because sometimes people are like, oh my gosh, but if like God's in all the spaces, like thinking of some God up in the sky, some like older childhood version of that is like, how couldn't you ever have an erotic space? Well, where do you think eroticism came from? It's like eroticism came from, we're in this space where like, a higher power created all of this. So there is this myth that anything, if you invite like God or faith or spirituality into a romantic erotic relationship, that it won't be spicy. Well, where did eroticism come from? Where did all of this stuff come from? Some of the spiciest, most fun erotic relationships. I would say that the ones that are actually really nourishing and yummy and, whether it's unintentionally or intentionally, are inviting that kind of God space into the connection. So yes, there you go. 3 ways to love yourself, wishing you so much love of yourself. In this phase of creation, I am really enjoying learning all the things, putting out the videos, putting out 1 video a week. I will over time put out more interviews. I'd love it if you subscribed and joined me as this channel expands and grows. And I also am doing more programs. So there are more ways to connect with me and work with me as well. So like I said, I will put my Instagram handle down below if you want to DM me to look into any of my programs. Right now, there is a program that I have been working on, a group program for women that's called Radiance, about finding your unique radiance. Thank you so much for joining me and wishing you so much yummy self-love and love in general in your life and of your life.